Good afternoon, and welcome to the Go Beyond Profit Expert Forum. I'm Megan McCamey with Go Beyond Profit, which, as you know, is a statewide alliance of more than 760 CEOs and their companies who have made a pledge to go beyond and care for their communities and their people. And I'm joined today by two of Georgia's finest experts. I have with me Natalie Paquin, who is the president and CEO of Points of Light, and is a transformational visionary leader with an amazing track record that we'll get to hear about today. Before Points of Light, she was with the Girl Scouts in their C-suite. She's also an attorney by training and brought that as a civil rights attorney at the Department of Education and several other school districts, as well as in private practice. And she brings all of these talents to serve on corporate boards where she has done that for decades. So Natalie, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Megan.
And also I have Frank Fernandez, who is the president and CEO of the Community Foundation for Greater Atlanta, which he just joined in August of this year. We know Frank as a transformational community revitalization leader, and from his work at the Arthur M. Blank Foundation, in particular on the Atlanta West Side, where we saw how he brought business collaboration and innovation to life. He also has over 15 years of executive experience in economic development, affordable housing, and social justice issues. So thank you, Frank, not only for being here, but for hosting us in your lovely building, in your lovely space. We're
happy to do it.
So it's been a year, hasn't it? And business and community leaders alike have been grappling with a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, an economic downturn, and a historic reckoning in racial inequity. Businesses have superpowers to bring to the solutions, for sure. And their people, their employees, their neighbors, are all looking to them to respond. Today, we're going to dig into help. We want to help business leaders define the needs, look at the data, think about what is needed in our region. And then also think about what's possible when they imagine engaging. And finally, really grapple with how do you set your path forward? How do you create a plan, both as a business leader and as a company with assets to bring to bear? So let's dig in. I'd love to start with framing up the needs. Let's talk about the data. Let's talk about what our region needs. Frank, you want to kick that off? I know you have some from the foundation.
Sure. So we've been able to gather a lot of great data as a function of the partnership we have with United Way in terms of standing up a response and recovery fund. And through that, have been able to really get a good, comprehensive, nuanced understanding of the challenge. And what I would say at a high level is that what this pandemic and the resulting racial injustice moment we're in have really, I think, pulled back the veil on and exacerbated is the reality that we are a community, we are a region that has some pretty significant inequities, socioeconomic as well as other. And what we've seen over the last 6 to 7 months is that onion started to get peeled back in terms of really understanding both the existing challenges that were there as well as how they're getting worse. And so what I would focus on, and through our experience and through some of our data partners like the Atlanta Regional Commission as well as Neighborhood Nexus, really starting to understand who is feeling the most significant impacts. And that tends to be folks who are Black and brown and folks who are lower income. And we're hearing a lot of the term essential workers. And when you look at from an economic perspective, and what the most recent data suggests is that for folks who make $30,000 or less, we're in a severe recession and they're really, really feeling it. For folks who make $60,000 or more, we're not in a recession, and they're not feeling it, right? And so there is this kind of two-tiered or chasm that's really been created between essential and non-essential workers. And that is something that we at the Community Foundation are very focused on through our COVID fund. And one of the things that we've been able to do when we stood up the fund in March, we were kind of building the plane as it took off. We really didn't have a clear sense of what the needs were. We just wanted to be able to rapidly respond as they arose. And now, 6 months in, we have a lot more data. And what the data is telling us is that there are a few key areas where there's significant continuing need. So one would be mental health. I think any of us can attest to that the world has low-grade depression, right? And when you layer onto that toxic stress, when you layer onto that people who don't have a job, who lost their job, or kids who aren't able to really fully go through schooling, or don't have access to food, it just makes it even more. And so being able to really address our mental health needs broadly, but for those who are especially feeling, is a significant need and challenge. The second one is really about education. One of the things that when we started, we all thought, this will be over in the fall, we just got to make it to summer and we'll get back. And then once July hit, we realized that wasn't the case. And now more and more data is coming out about how kids, whether in Atlanta public schools or across the region, who are on free or reduced lunch, are falling further and further behind. And how are we going to make up that gap? Because they were already behind. And so that's another significant need. Housing was a challenge for folks in the city of Atlanta and more broadly, increasingly. But everyone's been talking about this eviction tsunami that's coming or anticipated. And while there have been a lot of good moratoriums have been put in place, at some point, the bill is going to have to get paid. And it's going to be a real challenge for lower income folks to be able to do that. Because once you lose your home, it is very clear that has a spiraling effect in terms of your family, what happens to you, and other things that start to make themselves prominent and harder to overcome. And lastly, around food. You talked a little bit about food. Many kids, for example, relied on schools to provide them with at least 2 meals a day. And then we saw that continue over the summer. And we're still in primarily a virtual type of context for a lot of folks. And so that continues to be a big need for folks. And the challenge that we see going into 2021 is that we've been able to have a lot of great, whether at the federal, state, and local level, stimulus and other types of support to help folks bridge that. But at some point, we're going to have to pay that bill as well. And state budgets are being cut as well as local. And so we're still in the very first stages of this crisis because we're going to be in recovery for a very long period of time.
I think that's great. And it certainly sort of brings a hyper focus to, you said, mental health, education, housing, and food scarcity. Natalie, how have you seen in your role companies responding to these needs or other needs, quite frankly, that you're seeing that are really capturing people's attention?
Sure. Well, Points of Light is a global network, and we're in 200 cities and 37 countries around the world. Our partner in Georgia is Hands On Atlanta, so we're really pleased to work with them. And, the data that we're seeing actually globally provides Georgia with leading indicators and sometimes lagging indicators. And what we've seen is 75% of our network has said that they're seeing food insecurity, access to healthcare services, and the digital divide as primary drivers of need in their community. And so we are seeing companies lean in these areas in particular.
Great. They seem to be overlapping. The data
Yes.
is both, giving it some focus. Okay, great. So companies have been getting really good at volunteerism, at corporate engagement. That traditional volunteerism has been pretty tough this year to imagine how to get your people engaged. And yet, Natalie, I know you have some brand new research that says that employees are actually more interested than ever in seeing their companies help them volunteer. So can you help us imagine ways that people can engage with their companies?
Sure. Well, we're really excited to share more data about what we call civic engagement. And so people are volunteering, but they're also getting involved in other ways. They're using their voice, they're using their purchase power, they are donating, and so there are many ways that people get involved. What we're seeing is we just did a survey. It was 1,400 people across the country in various age groups. And we were looking at their motivations, their behaviors, their attitudes around giving, and and donating and being engaged. And what we found is during this pandemic, 95% of all respondents said that they will be engaged as much or more post-COVID. We know that there is just a commitment of the human spirit to stay engaged, a commitment of the human spirit to help others, and that has not decreased during this pandemic.
That's so encouraging if you think about the needs are greater and we're watching them potentially slide in a direction that we need to combat. So the energy and enthusiasm, clearly your data into U.S. employed adults is saying they're in.
The energy and data definitely says they're in, and then we did an oversampling of Generation Z. And Gen Z, they are between 24 and younger. And what they are basically saying is they absolutely are requiring companies to be engaged, companies to take social stands, and they're just being smarter about how they spend their money and be involved. So yes, we're really excited about what that data tells us.
That's exciting, yeah. Frank, anything that you're seeing in particular from companies on your end?
Yeah, no, I think what companies are trying to do, and again, this is such a fluid situation. So prior to coming here, I was with the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation and with the family of businesses. We grappled with that as well in terms of how you can volunteer. And so the two things that we saw, and I think will be the case for probably at least another 6 months, is there are some in-person opportunities in COVID conscious ways, right? And being smart about that. And I think as we get more and more data, we're able to really take precautions so that people can engage in that kind of way, because the one thing I think I can just speak for myself, we all crave connection, and Zoom is not enough. And being able to do it around a common cause is really helpful, right? So thinking about that. And then the other thing is there are some online or via phone ways to give back, and really exploring those with different partners, so that you can think through, again, each of your employees, some are going to be in a place where they want to engage and they feel comfortable doing that and it makes sense for them in person, and some may not. And so being able to provide both options to connect them to resources, I think is a great thing to do.
That's great, and you did mention the Points of Light Network, the Hands on Atlanta. There are organizations that are adapting and imagining to support companies to find ways so that they can offer their employees, even in this dispersed environment, ways for them to be engaged. Finances may be a bit stressed for companies in terms of imagining writing that check that they might traditionally have made. But I know both of you have seen and actually led innovative ways for companies to continue to provide resources, to use their superpowers to be engaged, that doesn't take the traditional check writing as the main function. Can you both talk a little bit about the examples you have and ways that companies can imagine?
Yeah, sure. So I'm happy to jump in.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, companies donating is always important, but sometimes they can't do that. And so what we're seeing is they are giving more time to their employees to volunteer. We're also seeing them partner with others to bring resources to bear. As Frank talked about, there's this skills-based volunteering, and so they're encouraging their employees to skills-based volunteer. There is one example I can share with you. There's a company, DTE, in Detroit, and we talked about the digital divide, and so many of the students in Detroit did not have access to computers. And so what they did is they actually worked with the Kellogg Foundation and other companies. They used their purchasing power to secure and negotiate a good rate for, I believe it was like 5,100, over 5,000 computers. Their employees help retrofit the computers to set them up, and then their employees also volunteered to be a call desk, a call center for parents. And so, you're really just taking your assets, and so we ask companies to map their assets, right? You're taking your assets, you're working with partners, and you're finding a way to leverage your assets and the assets of others to solve a community problem.
And I would imagine there's some great reward in finding that collaboration, in being able to work with another company, whether it's one of your vendors or it's just another company in your community. Collaborating like that probably has amazing lasting effects on their employees.
Yeah. Well, a part of our data we just released on civic engagement and motivations. I believe it's 60% of the people say that they volunteer and they give back because they just want to help people, but others is because it brings them joy and they want to solve a problem. So collaboration is absolutely one of the ways that we can do it, because what we're learning during this pandemic is we can't do it on our own.
Absolutely. How about you, Frank?
So typically we think of time, talent, and treasure, right? And treasurers, as you said, a little hard right now.
Yeah.
And so time and talent, and thinking about volunteering, and then I would focus on talent and give you two very specific examples, because I think it's helpful sometimes to concretize it, right? One actually is how I first met you, right, when you were at Denton's, is that they agreed to provide in-kind support to some of the West Side revitalization work by providing legal support. And so leveraging what your particular talent was, which is desperately needed, to support nonprofits there. So to me, that's one great example. Another one, which is we use here with some of our nonprofit partners, though. So we connect a lot of our nonprofit partners through this nonprofit called Catch a Fire, where we partner with them to match nonprofits with people with skills and companies with skills to help them with specific discrete things they need, whether it's a marketing plan or financial projections or what have you, being able to make those connections. So again, I'm not in a position to provide the financial support, but those skills, which a lot of groups need, are so critical, or something they can provide now during this pandemic.
That's a great point. And I loved, Natalie, the idea of asset mapping. So taking a minute to think about, and even asking your employees, what would you like to bring, right? What talents and resources and ideas do we have that we want to bring? And then working with organizations like that to match those up. But I do know, even from our experience working when I was with Denton's, the magic that comes back is your employees are much more engaged in their own job when they're able to use their professional skills to solve such a direct community need. That link actually makes them feel more valued in the workplace and actually feel more engaged and loyal to their company that they got that opportunity. So it's a great win. So are there ways that you would suggest to companies to choose? You know, we have listed probably 6 really stark needs that we see. They can't do them all. How do they become selective? How do they become selective about the organizations they might partner with? I know you both help companies to be more strategic, to be effective in what they do.
Yeah, sure. Well, we at Points of Light, and we would encourage you to visit our website. We just released a social impact plan, and it is full of tools and a guide that will help companies really create a roadmap in terms of how they get engaged. We ask companies to, one, look for inspiration. So you have to be really inspired.
Yeah.
Understand what your investment is. Plan strategically to integrate that investment for optimal impact. It really is important to take time to pause, and what I would say is take the privilege of time to think. We're always so busy doing that we really don't pause. And I think it's also important to understand the real interests of your stakeholders, the interests of your employees, your customers, the community that you live in, your vendors. If it's important to your employees, it is important to you. If it's important to your customers, it is important to you. And the one thing that we're learning from our data is the status quo is just, it's not going to make it.
Yeah.
It's not going to make it.
It's not going to work.
Yeah.
How about from your position here?
Yeah, no, I would just build on what Natalie's saying. I think typically for businesses and corporations, as they think about how they want to give back, there's 2 big things that come into play. One is, what are those issue areas that align with what their business is or their core competencies? Right. And what are their passions of their employees, the vendors, and others who are their stakeholders? And then how you balance that, right? So I'll give a couple examples that I've seen and worked with. So you think of Equifax. So they were a partner on the West Side, for example, and they really leaned into economic inclusion and financial empowerment, which makes sense, right? That's what they do. They work in that space in financial analysis, and they would leverage that, not just with their dollars, but also with their financial acumen to help provide analyses of credit and what the credit profiles of folks on the West Side looks like, what are the things you can do to improve it, and so leveraging that talent they have. And so they align what they focus on as a function of that. And then I've seen other places where it's really tied into what are the passions of the employees, or in terms of some places it's about kids and giving back in education. And so you really want to lean into that. And so each business has to make a determination about what the balance is between alignment with what your business core competencies are and how much you want to be driven by the passions of the leadership team, the employees, stakeholders. And there is no right or wrong answer, it's just what makes sense for your business.
Yeah. I love what you just said about there is no right or wrong answer. It leads me to my next question, which is, we've talked a little bit about how the demand, the need is great, okay? And the demand isn't going away. So it feels very poignant right now that business leaders are being asked, CEOs in particular, to respond. They're being asked to respond personally as well as the head of a business. These issues aren't, they're very personal. Can we think a little bit about how we might help business leaders get to the place where they can feel effective? What do we think are the first things that they can do to find that authenticity that we often talk about in terms of, going after and using your superpowers to address some of these needs?
Yeah. Frank, I'll
Sure.
build off of you.
And I think they'll be slightly different because, again, we're right now dealing with what are two crises at the same time, right? When the COVID crisis and the economic recession attached to that, and this racial justice or injustice moment we're in.
Yeah.
Right? And they are related, but they're different, and they require different responses, I would argue.
Okay.
And so, as it relates to the former, right, talking about COVID, I think, what I said before is really what I would lead with in terms of just, there's so much need, right, across the gamut. It's like, again, where are your passions? Because you're not going to go wrong because there's unfortunately lots of needs. As it relates to the racial justice or injustice moment, that's one is a much stickier thing. As a business leader, right now we're in very fraught times, and you got to navigate it authentically, but also carefully, right? And I think to me, to find that place of authenticity for a lot of folks, the way I've been trying to frame it is that you're having to swim in the deep end of the pool. This is an issue, or these is an issue and issues that historically we have not really grappled with in the office spaces. It may happen outside of work or at home or with friends, but we haven't been pushed to, and now we are.
Yeah.
And so to me, the best way is you're going to have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable and having these hard conversations and being willing to get in dialogue with folks to really talk through these issues. And it is something that I know we as our organization are grappling with in real time right now, and many businesses are as well. And kind of like before, there is no right or wrong answer, but you have to, I don't think at this point you have to engage at some level, and you have to be willing to be uncomfortable because that's kind of what the moment is requiring.
Yes. Yes, and I would say take a breath. Know that you are not alone. Be authentic. Seek to listen and learn. Commit to act. Figure out how you can sustain the good. Prioritize. There is this book I read a long time ago. I think it's called Uncommon Service by Annette Free. And she's a professor at Harvard, and she talks about ones and fives. And so this is about, prioritizing your values, prioritizing what you're good at. And she says, in order to be one, you have to be five and equally great at both. So you have to decide what you really want to be exceptional at, and recognize what you're not exceptional at, and be okay with that. And most people are not okay with not being exceptional at everything, and so you end up being average. So I would really encourage companies to prioritize. The other, recommendation we would have is to make sure that whatever you commit to, that you actually can deliver on. And if you can't deliver, then just say we can't deliver. Because today's society, we say that they come with checks and receipts. They can check your words and compare them to your actions as the receipt of what you are doing or not doing. And so just recognize that.
Well, I think be okay with being uncomfortable, recognizing that in this moment it's going to be important to find your way to be a part of solutions. And the question of of inequities and lack of opportunities, and in particular the racial dialogue, is a more personal and perhaps more difficult one to engage with, but perhaps even more important to take that moment, to take that breath and imagine how to do it authentically. We talked a little bit when we were together before this about being frozen, about seeing that you don't have the skills as an individual person to get into this, to solve, racial inequity in this place that we're in. Can we have leaders take a breath? Where would you say they should turn to as leaders to come up with their plan, to imagine how their company and they as individuals might respond? Are there people that you all have come across, either in the foundation or otherwise, that really are receptive to having a CEO say, I'd like to learn more as I grapple with this?
So I can talk a little bit. There is a growing set of folks who work in this space, almost like a cottage industry, of people who are doing racial equity assessments, for example, to come in and work with organizations. We've had that here, and I know a lot of our partners have done that as well. And I know a lot of businesses have had folks come in. And so I think, I won't list them all, but it's something, I think, a resource we can help provide in terms of some of those different options. The other thing I would say is that there are also some of our kind of association type of organizations. So I think for us as a community foundation, one of the things we're trying to do as the home for philanthropy, right? Where we bring together a lot of the foundations, is how can we be a resource and help create a platform that allows philanthropy and foundations to come together in constructive ways around issues of equity and racial equity in particular. But also, for example, the Metro Atlanta Chamber, where Katie Kirkpatrick is the new CEO, and they're working very diligently and intentionally around what is business's role in this, and what should be business doing within their own practices, and what they should be supporting. And so I think turning to some of those types of organizations who are also thinking about inclusive economic development in a way they haven't historically are also good places to turn to really understand, especially for CEOs and for businesses. I think that would be a great place to start, because it is something that they had started before this crisis and before 2020 and have really just accelerated since then.
It's great to point out, go to resources. Mm-hmm. You can sit for a minute and take a breath and think about where you personally want to engage or how you might want to lead your company. But there are these resources that can help you with the action steps.
Yes.
To getting there. So that's super helpful. Anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I would add at Points of Light, we have a CSC, we call it. It's a Corporate Service Council, and it is membership, and it's other companies where their corporate, their social enterprise leaders are around the table, and they come and they do peer sharing. Yeah. We also have a social impact guide that again provides additional information. But the one thing that I would recommend to companies is that they're always, companies are usually familiar with benchmarking and benchmarking for whatever your product or service is. And so this is an opportunity to benchmark in terms of your social impact agenda. Who's doing it well? What are you learning? What are they doing? And then ask yourself, what will it take for us to actually move the needle in whatever area it is that we have decided is a priority for us? And so I would say look to peers and benchmark your success against others.
To that point, Go Beyond Profit launched this summer a Georgia Corporate Generosity Tracker, which basically highlights companies and their innovative efforts to address a variety of needs. And it does give you that quick glance at what your peers are doing in the state of Georgia to imagine what you might do, whether it's in your industry or in your town. It gives a statewide glimpse into company response. So that might be helpful.
Call.
And make a call.
Your
peers are working on this as well. You said, both of you, you're not actually alone. It may feel a bit in this Zoom culture like we're alone, but we're not. Everybody is hearing their employees and their customers ask for response. Everybody's in that same position. Do you all think that there is a willingness to allow CEOs to come at this step by step? Is there a way that businesses can begin and not take on the largest of stances, the large grand proclamation? Are there steps they can take to show their intentions? And will you think there'll be patience and a willingness to watch companies grow into their response?
I would say that's a fraught question, right? Because I'll be honest, I think it just depends on your sector.
Yeah.
It depends on how profile your business is, and depends on who your customers are, in all honesty.
Yeah.
Should it be the case that we should be patient with folks? Maybe, but we're not, the moment we're in right now, that may not be, we may not have that luxury. And so part of it, in all honesty, is again, this is this is real time for us as well. As a foundation, we've had folks who've come to us and critiqued our approach on these issues, and so we need to be responsive in real time.
Yeah.
But we also have to do the hard work of really engaging on these issues, and that's not something you do in a couple weeks or even a couple months, especially not remotely. This is going to take time. So, and we've made that commitment. This is a longer term investment and proposition for us. However, there are certain things we need to do right now. And so part of it is understanding for your business and your context, okay, what are the things I can do now that signal to the broader community or to the stakeholders or customers or vendors that I need to really signal to, that suggests that I am listening and responding to the moment, and be able to do that now, kind of like your low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And then what are those things that I think are harder and longer term that we need to, you shouldn't rush, right? That need to take that time, right? Because one of the things that I think has been very clear for a lot of folks is that as it relates to these issues, because it makes us uncomfortable, we just want to fast forward to the solution. Oh, we'll just do that and we're good. Right? And the challenge is so much of this situation and the dynamics of this are relational. You have to first pause and understand where you are and where you've been, because there are a lot of folks who've kind of had to deal with the effects of that. And if you're going to move forward and change organizational behavior and practices, you've got to first get people to have trust and people to understand kind of how we got where we are and what the implications of that are. And again, that is not something you can do quickly. You can't rush it because it's built on relationship and trust. And so that stuff you need to do it slowly and deliberately, and then think through, okay, all right, that makes sense, but what are the 2-3 things I can do right now that signal, whether internally and or externally, that we hear and we're moving it in the right direction?
Sure, I'll build on that and say the 2 or 3 things that leaders can do right now is to commit, to communicate, and to act. And when we say commit, people are talking about a new normal. Commit to a better normal. Commit to a better normal. Communicate. If you don't communicate, people will make it up. And so, we're all in charge of the frequency of our communications and the quality of our communications. And then take action. Really act. And it's okay if you make a mistake. It's okay if it doesn't work out. Evaluate, almost like a sprint. How can I get faster? How can I get better? And do it again.
I love that. And so, what does it look like if we get this right? What is the possibility? What is the optimism? Okay, it's going to be hard work, but we're not doing it because we just have to. We're not doing it just because somebody's telling us that we should. What is the fabulous outcome for business, community, and people alike if we stick with this, if we commit and we do the action? What does that look like?
Yeah, sure. I would ask all of us to imagine the state of Georgia being number 1 in the United States and a model for the world in every financial, economic, social, environmental metric that matters. Someone's going to be number 1. Why not Georgia? And what will it take to make that happen?
I love that.
So the only thing I would add is, as you think about these issues of diversity, inclusion, and equity, right? Because kind of everyone's talking about it.
Yeah.
there are three things I think in terms of what does that look like and the why, right? So a lot we've been focused on the moral imperative, right? This is the right thing to do, and we want a more just society. That's completely true. But also there is a business argument to be made in terms of more inclusive workplaces and how they perform better, how they have better retention, especially for folks of color. Right? So there is, I think, a strong business argument. And then the third piece is just a strong argument for helping to foster innovation when you have a diversity of perspectives. And so I think it has almost like this triple bottom line effect in terms of having this moral impact, but also this business as well as innovation impact in terms of, with respect to what I envision as possible and what I think the benefits are.
I love that, because the idea is if businesses do bring these superpowers that they have, they're people who are eager, the talent, the resources, then the outcome really will be not only we will have solved some of our educational crisis, our food scarcity issues, and our digital divide, the concerns that we're seeing exacerbated right now, but we will have a more innovative, thriving, collaborative, and diverse mindset in every company, which only in the end brings this remarkable Georgia that is number one across every metric, and our region and our statistics would prove out the commitment by everybody.
And a model for the world.
And a model for the world. Why not?
Why
there
not?
you go. Why not? Well, I want to thank you both so very much for your time today and for being willing to share this space with me. I know it's been a long time since any of us have sat in a room and had this kind of conversation. So thank you very, very much. And thank you all for joining us today.